going on, everybody? Kasabe here. We're just a few months away from MLB 21, which will be next gen on PS5 and maybe even on the Xbox and Switch. There's a lot of stuff that people are looking forward to see in the next edition of MLB The Show. I just wanted to run through a few of the things that I'm personally looking forward to once MLB 21 comes out, and kind of talking about why I think each of those is important to the overall quality of life of the game itself. So first, I just want to elaborate on what I get out of MLB The Show. I'm a very franchise-focused person. Diamond Dynasty doesn't really appeal to me too much. And really, Diamond Dynasty is San Diego Studios' main focus. I think they absolutely killed it with the content this year. People were able to get a lot of good players without having to do too much, at least later on in the year. So I commend SDS for that. I'm happy that the online community is doing well, and I hope going forward they're a little bit more ingrained in tournaments and like cash tourneys. There were some content creator tournaments and a couple tournaments to see who could win some cash prizes for those of the people who are more at the top of the game in terms of their player ranking. They're able to show off a little bit. I would love to see even more of that going forward. Really get baseball into a competitive scene, especially if you're going to start trying to entice new audiences from Xbox and Switch, maybe even PC, who knows. But for me personally, I just like simulation baseball. I've always enjoyed creating a team, whether it was on Madden or maybe even 2K. MLB The Show kind of added that this year, where you could import a created team. In the past, they had some things where you could like schedule promotions or like add seats to your stadium. I want a little bit more of an immersive experience like that. I like tweaking some things about like the team, where they're from, their colors, their jerseys, just to, put my own little spin on it. I'm not really a out of the park baseball type of guy where I just like manage. I enjoy playing, but I also enjoy like taking control of creative aspects of each team. For those of you who aren't really aware of what I do on my YouTube channel related to MLB The Show, this year I've streamed a 30-team created franchise with all custom teams. And I don't play the games, I just kind of stream them, simulate them, see how things go, make some roster moves. I would like to perhaps start another franchise where I put a little bit more into it. I get more into the jerseys, the development of each of those teams. And I'm hoping that my patience is rewarded next year, where they kind of add on to what they added this year with just the ability to add custom teams. I hope they do more with sponsorships and maybe just like the development of players in franchise, since that's kind of been left untouched for at least a few years. I personally very much enjoy getting rid of all of the real players on my franchise team and developing people from anew, creating connections with those players. And the fun thing is, even though a player might have great potential or overall, there are some players that might be good, but I don't perform well with. There might be some players that aren't rated very good, but I do very well with. That's the connection you kind of get as you play franchise, as you go through the season. You get to find what works, what doesn't. You get to get a more comfortable feel for the players that you do well with, and build on the team from there. And the other thing about custom teams is I just wanted to make it easy for everyone. There are a lot of times where people ask about the videos I make or the franchises I have, and I tell them how much work it might be to create something like that on their own. A lot of people out there want to make a 30-team franchise with all colleges like LSU, North Carolina, etc. It's a lot of work. The logos are out there, but there are some additions that they'd have to spend some man hours on just to get the even creation off the ground. So that's why the first thing that I hope that SDS adds next year, in addition to the custom teams, is a custom team vault. Right now, you cannot share your teams with anybody else. I've tried it, tried manipulating some of the PlayStation files, just did not work. So as of now, you have to manually create all the teams yourself, pick the colors, the names, the audio, the stadium. Really, it's just the logos, but even then you have to tell the creator like where you want to put those logos that you downloaded or found on the vault, and make each jersey that way. It's a very timely process, even just for one team. Imagine trying to do all 30. I think for me it took over 2 or 3 days, and I was spending a couple hours on each. I'm still not really happy with the results. And part of that might have just been that I would have had to make even more logos to satisfy myself, but I just wanted to get things up and running, There have been some quality of life improvements that San Diego Studios has made in the past, so I'm also a very avid logo creator, as some of you might know. And for a few years, it was just a real chore to try and find the logo that you wanted. SDS listened to that. They added a search feature, which is super helpful. Some of you might not even know what the old system looked like. And that's why that quality of life change was so good, is because people could just find stuff really easily and download it. It only took like a few seconds. The only thing I'm unsure of with the Create a Team Vault that I hope that SDS makes is how tangible it might be for people to actually know what they're getting. When you go on the logo vaults, you can see a picture of exactly what you're about to download. With the teams, it's a little bit more suspect because you have to change the jerseys, the audio, there might be some colors that you want to tweak up. So maybe if you were able to like load a file and you could just like make some last second changes before you did anything, that would be cool. But again, there isn't really a good way to showcase it like when somebody downloads it, especially if like all the vaults are on the same page. You have the logo vault, you have the roster vaults, a whole bunch of things that you can just seamlessly go from one to the next. And having the team vaults would be a little bit tricky to also like organically keep along the same line. One other point to add to the Create a Team function is right now you can do a home uniform or away uniform. And once you start up the franchise with that team, you have those two uniforms. It just auto selects one of those two uniforms based on if you're playing on the road or at home. There isn't that menu where you can actually select your jersey once you get to that point. And maybe having a feature for an alternate jersey would be pretty cool. And that way you can cycle through all of the different jerseys that you have. Maybe even having that third option is something that could really kick up the immersiveness up a notch, where you can pick whatever jersey suits you that day. So yes, Create a Team, custom teams is a very big part for me. I also hope that Create a Stadium is added. I think the reason that San Diego Studios has held out on this for so long is first of all, it would take a lot of time to do all the shading, the lighting, all the collision physics that people might take for granted. There's a lot of tweaks to make sure that like everything is very precise. You know, you don't want a fielder reaching for a foul ball and catching it like 4 feet over the fence, because like if you do Create a Stadium, there are going to be a bunch of pockets that, you know, people can like tweak, like here's the left field wall, here's the center field wall, here's the right field wall. Well, you got to make sure that those all mesh together. There might be a lot of opportunity for people in Diamond Dynasty to cheese the system, make sure they have like short porches everywhere, green monster walls in like every outfield direction. So I think SDS wants to use an abundance of caution when doing a Create a Stadium feature, if they do ever implement it. I think a good thing to draw feedback off of would potentially be Madden's Create a Stadium. So for those of you who don't play Madden very much, you have a few different options when you relocate a franchise. There's like a basic stadium, futuristic stadium, canopy stadium, and they're all touted as like basic or deluxe. By and large, they look the same when you're in the game. And from there, EA Sports is able to showcase like the team logos and colors on all the jumbotrons, all the electronics that are in the game. I think the one thing that makes it easy for EA Sports, like currently, with the system for the Create a Stadium that they have, is they only have a set number of teams that you can pick from. It might be a little bit more difficult to implement in MLB The Show, where you could do anything with the logo editor, but they have done that currently with Diamond Dynasty, and now Create a Team in franchise. They can add your logos to the scoreboards and things like that. It's just a matter of what else would you want to theme inside of the Create a Stadium. So I do think that San Diego Studios could add something Create a Stadium related, maybe just have 5 or 10 like generic things you can pick from, with a few like limited options of what you wanted to change inside the stadium. I don't think we're realistically going to get anything that lets you create an entire stadium, like absolutely everything from scratch, just because it would be kind of a graphical nightmare, even though the PS5 could handle it. Just you know, for like playing the game in Diamond Dynasty or whatnot, there might be some bugs or tweaks that just don't look very good. If SDS doesn't add Create a Stadium, I would at the very least just want 30 minor league team stadiums. Currently there's about 24 or 25. And the reason for that is I think there are a lot of like 30 team leagues, whether it's AA, AAA, or one that you might make in franchise, where you kind of want everybody to have their own stadium. You don't want to like double up because that kind of breaks the immersion a little bit. And the challenge with that is stadiums are hard to make. As I mentioned, I remember a couple years ago, somebody mentioned on Reddit or SDS's like forum pages that they weren't able to update a few things. I think it was like Coors Field because they didn't have the capital to actually go visit that stadium until like the MLB season had already started. So that came out in like a June patch as opposed to something they could work on during the off season. And with those stadiums, it's a little bit tougher because you actually have to look at a stadium that already exists, make sure everything is picture perfect. Minor league stadiums, there's a little bit more creativity involved, and you don't have to like actually match it up to a real life example. So there are some more creative liberties you can take there. I think having 30 minor league stadiums would really help out the community. Maybe also just a few more couple cool ballparks that people could use in Diamond Dynasty as well. I used a lot of the minor league stadiums for my custom franchise. The other thing that kind of might just be a little bit immersion breaking is the fact that like they're all minor league stadiums. So they only have like 10 or 11,000 fans actually watching the game. If you're relocating a team from the MLB, you probably don't want to keep the same stadium that MLB team just had. So if you relocated the Phillies to like Vancouver, like you don't want stuff that still says Phillies everywhere. And at the same time, all those minor league stadiums, like if you relocated a team, you would want something that realistically matches the audience size of a major league ballpark. So that would be like 35 to 40,000 fans. Minor league stadiums, they only hold like 10,000. So ticket sales won't be as good between like major league stadiums and the one that you just picked. So having a few more realistic major league options like that might also be cool. In franchise mode, I also keep the broadcast graphics and packages on for the most part. I keep all the announcers on. And it can be a bit of a grind during the 162 game season to hear the same things over and over. I still haven't gotten tired of Matt Vasgersian after over 10 years. I still enjoy him as an announcer. I do enjoy the presentations by Heidi Watney a couple times during the game. I wish there was a little bit more varied presentations, which they will continue to add in blocks as time goes on. But I have a Cubs franchise that I also play, and every time Heidi Watney comes on to tell about how the Cubs are doing, it's the same exact line every time. And maybe just having like 2 or 3 to choose from. So if I'm playing a game one night and then playing a game the next night, there might be some variation between the two. And also like situational based. So Heidi Watney always talks about how a team's doing. She might talk about the rain, if there's any weather involved, or if teams like statistics are really good or really low, she talks about those. Maybe just adding a few more things. In addition to that, maybe you have her go out into the stadium and like interview a fan, or maybe she could talk about like the history of the team, the stadium. There are a lot of cool directions you could take. The only thing is you might want to use a couple of things where you can use it for the actual major league teams and also like the custom ones going forward. I also wish there was a little bit more announcer banter during the game. So 2K does a really good job of this. Kevin Harlan will be talking to somebody during the game, and over the course of like 3, 4, maybe even 5 different possessions on the basketball court, they'll just be talking about the same thing. They'll seamlessly integrate to like somebody making a dunk or a shot. Sometimes if it's a dunk, they get really excited, and then they go back to talking about the thing that they were just talking about earlier, same topic and everything. And that's something you see a lot during baseball games. There's a lot of moments that might seem a bit dull just because the baseball game's 3 hours long and there's a lot of time in between pitches and whatnot. So normal announcers have banter where they talk to their co-announcers or color guys about random things. Some of them are even non-baseball related. And I think that would be cool to have some banter where you might carry over a couple pitches or maybe even a couple at bats. Just the fine line you have to walk is like, is it too repetitive to the point where people actually get annoyed with it? I remember this a few years ago about, the announcers saying the same thing about Yan Gomes like every other at bat. And you just kind of have to make it a bit rare, but still have it to the point where it kind of keeps the game fresh. I also really like the direction that they've taken with the MLB Network graphics package. Everything's very super realistic to how MLB Network games actually unfold. And again, I'm going to kind of reference 2K for this because their announcer packages are really cool, but during the game they might talk about the upcoming schedule, which MLB The Show also does. But I think it would be kind of neat to also maybe just take a few random baseball games that are coming up for the week, and this is MLB TV's upcoming schedule, or maybe even you could just reference MLB Network shows, like the ones that actually show on the channel. Just be like, hey, tune in for this after the game, or this is also a program that we do when there isn't a live baseball game. There are a lot of different directions you could go with that. You could talk a little bit more about MLB Network. You could talk over random stats during the game. You could do some trivia. There's a lot of teams out there that like do Twitter polls, or like they do trivia and like people will answer, and then like a couple innings later they'll give you the answer, or maybe shout out a user that actually had the correct answer. That would be something really cool. Like during the game broadcast, you do something in the third inning and then you go back to it in the sixth inning and just be like, here was the answer to that trivia question, or something like that would just really add a lot of immersiveness to the game. In addition, we've had Mark DeRosa, Dan Plesac, Harold Reynolds was on for 1 year before he got axed. Maybe bring in some guest announcers. I think it would be cool to have some like former players, other MLB Network personalities that Matt Vasgersian can maybe talk to during the game for like an inning, or maybe a couple outs before they like leave for the inning. And that goes back to the banter point I made. Like they could talk, then Vasgersian could call the pitch, and then they go back to talking to the guest again. And that's something too where like you could even have a player who might be affiliated to a certain team. So I'm a Minnesota Twins fan. Recently Justin Morneau's been doing some games on Fox Sports North. Like maybe you could bring him in and just talk for a few innings. Or if you have some players that are already in the game for Diamond Dynasty and are still alive, like you could bring in them for an interview. That would be really cool. This last year in franchise, they added some player art to the cards. So instead of having like a silhouetted outline of a player for their player art, they actually took like their graphical scan of that player's face, added it to the card. One thing I would really enjoy is when you have like the top player of the game after the game, they kind of have like the pitcher or the batter like do something mid-motion, they take a freeze like shot of them with like the card art kind of superimposed around them. One feature I think will be super cool is when they do that, you just hit like the square button or the start button or something, save that picture, and you could use that card art to look at for later in franchise. So for example, like the guy you just drafted first overall made his major league debut, he hit a couple home runs, save that picture, and then you go to look at it like 2 weeks later, like his stat sheet, picture's right there. I think that would be super cool. There are also a lot of different pictures that it takes for tops player of the game. So like some of them might be mid-swing from different angles. For the pitchers, same deal. Like sometimes they're striking somebody out, sometimes they're still in motion with the ball. You could have some variety involved where you could just pick the screenshot that interests you the most. So the one obvious question once MLB The Show comes out for Xbox and Switch is, will this be cross-platform? Will you be able to take up your progress that you started on PlayStation 5 and bring it to the Switch? So one thing I think would greatly benefit this franchise is to have cross saves, maybe with the cloud. So like if you played on PlayStation 5, you're in the middle of a franchise, you save the game, maybe you upload it to the cloud, you get on your Switch before you like go on a road trip or something like that, you download that cloud file, and then you can start playing on Switch during the road trip. The last thing I want to talk about for this edition of my MLB 21 wish list is player progression. And this is something that people have been talking about for at least a few years. Going to next gen would be the perfect time to do that. There are a lot of players who retire at like age 35, even though they're perfectly good and capable of continuing to play baseball. There's also a lot of people who might be like 33, 34, and they're overall just tanks for no reason whatsoever. On top of that, you also have a lot of players who you draft and have a potential, but they're like a 30 or 40 overall. And by the time they make it to the MLB, they're actually like a good overall to the point where they can actually become an MLB player. They're already like 28 or 29 years old. And we don't really see that in the MLB. You don't have a lot of players who are generational talents because of their potential that break into the big leagues almost into their 30s. I want to see more players that are 19 or 20, just absolute superstar phenoms. I have not found a single player like that, save for once, in like any of the franchises I've ever done. And I want there to be a couple players who you know, you just can't pass up. And I know you can't trade draft picks, but even just having to play against them, like as a divisional rival, would be something which is like, wow, I have to make a game plan around this particular player. I'm also 9 years into this franchise that I have with the Cubs, where I've been playing since 2014, and it's just very much like throwing a dart at a dartboard for like what players are degrading, even though they're like 28 or 29 years old, which ones continue to go up. I have a few players that are like B potential, and when they're like 28 or 29, they're already like sinking into the low 70s. In a couple of years, they'll probably be into like the 60s overall, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Like, there are some players who fizzle out early, don't get me wrong, but there's just no real way of like telling what players are going to do that and what isn't. And that's just kind of how like baseball is with like scouting and whatnot. But I wish there was like a little bit more of a way to tell that as like a franchise manager, because it's a little confusing sometimes. You have some players that are doing perfectly well, hitting like 300 average. I have a few players like this, and they're just degrading. I don't quite understand it sometimes. I'm sure there's a whole lot more that I'll think about from now until March, and that was mostly just franchise stuff. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who might be watching this who are avid Diamond Dynasty players. You know, could give two craps about franchise mode. Let me know if there's anything that you guys would want to see, or anything else that you think might be touched on for next gen. I might even make a second edition of this video with some of the feedback that I received from you guys, or anything else that I might figure out before March. But until then, I hope to make a few more videos for MLB The Show related matters until the launch of MLB 21. One thing I'd love to talk about before the next game is the soundtrack. There's a lot of you out there who just turn on Spotify as soon as the new soundtrack comes out. You might give it a couple days, but something that I've really been passionate about is like video game soundtracks and how well they fit the actual like theme of the game. And I want to make a video about like what songs you guys might like the best from year over year, or what edition of MLB The Show had the best soundtrack overall. So I might make a few more videos about that from here until March. And as always, I'm taking logo requests during the off time of the season. The one time I will not be making them is from February to March, since SDS usually cuts off the year-to-year transfer around that time, but feel free to send me requests in the meantime. I'll be making more logo tip videos as I see fit, maybe with some feedback from you guys. If you guys would like to see more content for MLB The Show, be sure to subscribe. Follow me on Twitter or Reddit for more MLB The Show content. I'll have the links to those in the description of this video. And as always, thanks for watching.